Hi, this is Pink, and my friends call me Pink. Today's story is The Tale of Peter Rabbit by Beatrix Potter. I live in the beautiful state of Vermont, and we have just come through a dark and cold winter where everything has been bundled up and gray and white, and we are coming into the season of the beautiful springtime, which is my favorite time of year in Vermont, when the leaves start to pop on the trees and then become green. The grass turns from brown to green, and my favorite is that flowers begin to sprout out of the ground. So when I was looking for a story to read the other day, I came serendipitously upon the story of Peter Rabbit. So let me tell you a little bit of background behind Peter Rabbit. The story was inspired by a pet rabbit that Potter had as a child, which she named Peter Piper. Through the 1890s, Potter sent illustrated story letters to the children of her former governess, Annie Moore. And in 1900, Moore, realizing the commercial potential of Potter's stories, suggested they be made into books. On the inside flap of The Tale of Peter Rabbit, it reads, "When Beatrix Potter wrote and illustrated The Tale of Peter Rabbit, she had little idea how popular this story and the 22 which followed would become. Each of the 23 tales has been reprinted over 100 times, and the 80 or so years since their initial publication, much of the delicate brushwork and detail has disappeared from the pictures. So please join me on this journey. The Tale of Peter Rabbit by Beatrix Potter." Once upon a time, there were 4 little rabbits. Their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. They lived with their mother in a sandbank underneath the root of a very big fir tree. "Now, my dears," said the old Mr. Rabbit one morning, "you may go into the fields and down the lane, but don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there. He was put in a pie by Mrs. McGregor. Now run along and don't get into mischief. I am going out." Then Mrs. Rabbit took a basket and her umbrella and went through the wood to the baker's, where she bought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns. Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, who were good little bunnies, went down the lane to gather blackberries. But Peter, who was very naughty, ran straight away to Mr. McGregor's garden and squeezed under the gate. First he ate some lettuces and some French beans, and then he ate some radishes. And then, feeling rather sick, he went to look for some parsley. But round the end of the cucumber frame, who should he meet but Mr. McGregor? Mr. McGregor was on his hands and knees planting out young cabbages, but he jumped up and ran after Peter, waving a rake and calling, "Stop, thief!" Peter was most dreadfully frightened. He rushed all over the garden, for he had forgotten his way back to the gate. He lost one of his shoes among the cabbages, and the other shoe amongst the potatoes. After losing them, he ran on all 4 legs and went faster, so I think he might have gotten away altogether if he had not unfortunately run into a gooseberry net and got caught by the large buttons on his jacket. It was a blue jacket with brass buttons. It was quite new. Peter gave himself up for lost and shed big tears, but his sobs were overheard by some friendly sparrows who flew to him in great excitement and implored him to exert himself. Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve, which he intended to pop upon the top of Peter, but Peter wriggled out just in time, leaving his jacket behind him. and rushed into the tool shed and jumped into a can. It would have been a beautiful thing to hide in if it had not had so much water in it. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps, hiding under a flower pot maybe. He began to turn them over carefully, looking under each. Presently, Peter sneezed. Ka-choo! Mr. McGregor was after him in no time, and he tried to put his foot upon Peter, who jumped out of a window, upsetting 3 plants. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor, and he was tired of running after Peter. He went back to his work. Peter sat down to rest and was out of breath and trembling with fright, and he thought he had not the least idea which way to go. Also, he was very damp after sitting in that can. After a time, he began to wander about, going lippity-lippity, not very fast, and looking all around. He found a door in a wall, but it was locked, and there was no room for a fat little rabbit to squeeze underneath. An old mouse was running in and out over the stone doorstep, carrying peas and beans to her family in the wood. Peter asked her the way to the gate, but she had such a large pea in her mouth that she could hardly answer. She only shook her head at him. Peter began to cry again. Then he tried to find his way straight across the garden, but he became more and more puzzled. Presently he came upon a pond where Mr. McGregor filled his water cans. A white cat was staring at some goldfish. She was very, very still, but now and then the tip of her tail swished, as if it were alive. Peter thought best to go away without speaking to her. He had heard about cats from his cousin, little Benjamin Bunny. He went back towards the tool shed, but suddenly, quite close to him, he heard a noise of a hoe. Scritch, scratch, scratch, scritch. Peter scuttered underneath the bushes, but presently, as nothing happened, he came out and climbed upon a wheelbarrow and peeped over. The first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor hoeing onions. His back was turned to him. Towards Peter, and beyond him was the gate. Peter got down very quietly off the wheelbarrow and started running as fast as he could along a straight walk behind some black currant bushes. Mr. McGregor caught sight of him at the corner, but Peter did not care. He slipped underneath the gate and was safe at last in the wood outside of the garden. Mr. McGregor hung up the little jacket and the shoes for a scarecrow to frighten the blackbirds. Peter never stopped running or looked behind him till he got home to the big fir tree. He was so tired that he flopped down upon the nice soft sand of the floor of the rabbit hole and shut his eyes. His mother was busy cooking. She wondered what he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and a pair of shoes that Peter had lost in a fortnight. I am sorry to say that Peter was not very well during dinner that evening. His mother put him to bed and made some chamomile tea, and she gave a dose of it to Peter, 1 tablespoon to be taken at bedtime. But Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail had bread and milk and blackberries for supper. The end. Thank you for joining me, and until next time, keep pushing play.